coming up next. Stay tuned to learn more about the state of the art in blockchain and cryptocurrency technology. Reimagine 2020.
Sure. I'm Justin Rice. I'm head of ecosystem at the Stellar Development Foundation. We're the organization that leads the growth and development of the Stellar blockchain network. And you know, I'm excited about blockchain. I think it's got a really we're at a really great moment where blockchain can like change the way that we deal with money and the way that money hits the world. And yeah, I'm excited to be here as part of Reimagine 2020.
Hey everybody, it's Patrick McLain, one of your hosts, as you know, for Reimagine 2020. I want to thank everybody that's been watching so far, whether you're a university student around the world or general blockchain enthusiasts, platform, enterprise company. I think we've been having some really interesting conversations and have another one coming up. I'm going to introduce you to Justin Rice from Stellar. Our team, you know, as everybody knows, we do a lot of the university initiatives. One of the first partners that we kind of brought into that when we launched the Education Alliance was Stellar, and we feel like they've always been a good steward. You know, I think I just had a little bit of a conversation with Justin before we got going. It sounds like to me, and I won't butcher too much, I'll let him explain himself, but he sounds like he kind of lives in, you know, a little bit of in the middle between, you know, developers and kind of the applications and the various parties that see them go through. So before I go on too long on it, Justin, it's very nice to have you. And why don't you introduce yourself to everybody and, you know, let them know kind of how you got into blockchain.
Hey, I'm Justin Rice. I am the head of ecosystem at the Stellar Development Foundation. And, you know, Stellar is really an open financial network that people can build on, people can use. And our goal at the SDF is to help steward that network and help it grow. And ultimately, we envision a world of fairer, better access to money. What I do there is, as I said, I'm head of ecosystem, and that means that I sort of work with developers and with enterprises building on Stellar to help them understand the best way to do it. And I also help them understand how the technology works and connect with each other. And then I also help our developers sort of explain, talk to, connect with people who are building on Stellar. So, you know, Stellar is a backend open source technology, and basically the people who use Stellar are these enterprises and developers that build stuff on top of it that take advantage of like all of the features of the network. So it's really like kind of helping those businesses figure out how to use the network best.
Got it. Me and Justin are going to have like a really interesting conversation, I have a feeling, over the next 30 minutes. Side note, over these 72 hours that you guys are watching this, Justin, I think the Stellar team are going to present a keynote. We had a little bit of a scheduling conflict or miscommunication, so I don't even think Justin knew he was going to be interviewing with me. So I'm gonna do my best to make him feel as comfortable as possible. But Justin, by the way, first off, the yellow sweater, that's amazing. I like it. I like it. I like it.
Yeah, it's actually cold. I'm in New York. It's actually like weirdly cold. We just got hit with this polar vortex. So
you have the yellow sweater for the polar vortex. And now I just learned a life lesson. But hey, so can you tell me a little bit, like, and again, we have a lot of university students watching this, and I think general blockchain community are people that are just looking at blockchain for the first time, whether it be crypto or, you know, they want to deploy the technology for our business. And I'm really trying to kind of paint a picture for people about, you know, how people's evolution kind of looked like to kind of get to their strong beliefs in blockchain. So can you just walk me through a little bit, like, what were your kind of past business experience in life, or you know, experiences that kind of led you to blockchain, and you know, and how do you think your past experiences kind of helped bring you to this point?
Good question. I've had a lot of careers, a lot of different things that I've done in my life. And when I started out, as an adult, just like working, I did not expect to be working in technology at all, or in blockchain specifically. I mean, I spent a long time when I like out of the gate, just like doing a lot of writing. For a long time, I was in a band and we toured, and then I helped people record records and worked on soundtracks. And the reason why I bring that up is like the world of sort of being an independent artist, musician, you have to build things from the ground up. You have to grow your fan base, and you have to like really believe in what you're doing, because it's a hard thing to do, right? But as you do that, I think you learn like accountability. You learn how to actually create stuff that people are interested in, and you learn like how to make things that are useful. So like if you're making music or art of any kind, I think there has to be an audience that like it has meaning to. And then you also learn how to like hustle and how to get it out there and how to like evangelize, get people to believe in what you're doing. So that was sort of the first thing. And then, and with blockchain, I think all of that's true, right? You have to believe in it because it's a difficult thing to wrap your head around. And there's still this like steep barrier to adoption that we're all facing. And you have to make it useful in a way. You have to be creating something that people can actually start to that has an impact on people's daily lives, right? And then you have to be able to evangelize. You have to be able to take it out there and explain it to people. Like a huge thing that we have to do in general in blockchain is educate. Like if people can trust and believe and reason through what we're doing, I think it's going to work. So I think musician stuff kind of led me here. I mean, in between being a musician and working for the Stellar Development Foundation, I also worked for a dating website. And there it was sort of like we're in the middle of the two. Like we were trying to figure out ways to make the platform that we offered like really safe and full of good users, try to keep the bad users out. So I was working a lot, both with like humans and developers, trying to make it so that spam and scam and horrible people wouldn't annoy the real people, or worse. And so I think in that situation, again, it's also relates to blockchain. I think when you start as a developer to approach a big problem and to think about it, how you can solve it programmatically, if that thought intrigues you, which it really should for anyone who's like into computer science, like that's the deal right there. Like what can we do with this kind of thinking that will make the world a better place, that will solve some huge problem? If you're into that, like blockchain is great, because money is one of the biggest problems in the world, like where it is, how you get it, how it's allocated. And blockchain has the potential to like provide this totally new solution to the problems of money, and it hasn't been figured out yet.
Got it. And I want to kind of pivot here in a second to, what does your day-to-day look like at Stellar? How are you guys thinking about, what are the developer needs, right? Like what does the community really need to kind of make it easier for them to build, or what resources can you provide or support that kind of lower the barriers to either adoption or execution? But before we get into that, just one more kind of in your journey to this place. What was that moment? Like, how did you get into blockchain?
The moment, the reason why I specifically got into blockchain was because I was friends with people who got really into Bitcoin. And, I think it's that kind of like anarchic spirit that you have if you're part of like if you're in a band, if you're in a world of where you're trying to live by your own wits and
dude, selling albums out of the back of your trunk is the original hustle, dude. This is what the blockchain space needs. Like sometimes I laugh, I'm like, okay, I think there's been a lot of money invested in technology. I think a lot of the tech is there, and now I'm just like, I'm not sure these guys are good at marketing. I'm not even sure, right? So it's like, it's kind of refreshing. I get your point. Like we need like that mentality, right? To kind of push it. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, look, I think at some point we need marketing, and we probably need slick marketing. Like we need Mad Men, ad executives from Madison Avenue style marketing to like really push this forward. But there's also a different kind of marketing. There's this like DIY spirit that I think blockchain still has. And I think it is what drew me to blockchain, because like I said, when you're around people who are, like you said, selling records out of the back of their van, this kind of like punk rock ethos, there's a real connection between that and Bitcoin, right? Like early on, a lot of the ideals are just like overlap. So you end up, it's not uncommon if you're in like a weird band to know people who are into Bitcoin. And if they're into Bitcoin, you start listening to them and you realize that a lot of the thoughts that they have around money like really makes sense to you. So you start looking at a blockchain, and that's kind of how I ended up here.
All right, last question on music before we pivot into kind of what Stellar is doing. But if because you're the music guy, if Bitcoin or blockchain had a soundtrack, what would it be?
Oh man.
Like the Ramones or something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I you know, it's like I would love to pick a really particular like Ramones song, or like, you know, something even like Stiff Little Fingers or something.
Maybe the Beastie Boys. The Beastie Boys might fit into.
Yeah, the Beastie Boys. There you go. The Beastie Boys would be a pretty good soundtrack for blockchain. But you know, I got to say, part of what's cool about it is that like, I don't think there just needs to be one, right? Like, I think it's kind of like, pick your own music. You know, you own it.
That's fair. That's fair. This guy might have a future in politics. You got to go with the above all answer. So hey, let's kind of dive in a bit deeper. So I think again, you know, there's a lot of students on this call. I think there's a lot of the general blockchain community, and you know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, our team, you know, a little bit about us. Our team at MouseBelt, we have an engineering arm. We invest in projects. So we kind of we work with companies like Stellar, other companies on the education line. So we're kind of in the middle of a lot of things, right? And I'm always intrigued at the roadblocks. And, you know, I come from the traditional Silicon Valley world for many years, where it's like, I've seen development, I've seen engineering, I've seen execution. And I think for a long time, there wasn't necessarily the support needed. And I don't know if anyone was wrong on that. I think it was just, everything was moving so quickly from 2018, 2019. It wasn't that we were doing things wrong. It was just, it took us time to figure it out. But, you know, what does, and I think it's head of ecosystem. What does a head of ecosystem do for the general population, right? Like, can you walk through, everybody listening to this call, like, what is your job? What are your primary focuses? And like, how does that tie into Stellar's vision?
One of my primary focuses as this head of ecosystem is to work on creating like canonical documentation that explains how Stellar works, right? So we want Stellar to be a self-serve situation. Like, you can just show up, no permission necessary. You can start building on it. You can integrate with Stellar. You can use it to create products that like get out there and touch the world. And we don't want you to have to call anybody on the phone or know anybody to have to be able to do it, right? So having canonical, really good self-serve documentation that explains everything that you can do with Stellar and how you do it, that's super important. It's like a great, we make one, it serves many kind of tool, resource. And so that's something I work on a lot, is documentation. And then second, I think a lot, you know, outside of like, as we were talking about marketing, but independent of like trying to sell people on using this technology, there's also just informing people, educating people. So in addition to those canonical docs, a lot of what I also work on is like helping other resources get built. So we do a lot of developer outreach. We have a podcast, we have engineering talks, we have public roundtables that talk about building the standards for Stellar. So like engaging developers and ecosystem participants, namely like people who build stuff on Stellar, to come together and hash out the best practices for building. I like help organize a lot of that stuff. And my team creates a lot of that content that speaks to them and explains them and shows them how this stuff works and why it's important. Third, you know, at Stellar, we don't own the Stellar network, right? We're stewards of the Stellar network, and we try to make it so that it's, you know, we're really getting people to adopt it. And part of adoption, part of what we can do is like bootstrap it. And one way that we do that is through grants. So ecosystem team also administers 2 different kinds of grants that we have on Stellar. The infrastructure grants, which are basically like these ongoing grants for vital infrastructure built on top of the Stellar network, the kind of stuff that people build that other businesses need in order to use a blockchain. And then we have this thing called the Stellar Community Fund, which is basically like 3 times a year, there's this big hackathon. But we also put together hackathons. So we create prizes, bounties, and incentives for people to build on Stellar, and then we evaluate all the projects. And, you know, I think finally what we do is that we're pretty aware, the ecosystem team is pretty aware of all the projects that are building on Stellar. So we're always out there talking to people who are using Stellar and finding out what they're doing. And we're sort of the place where we can bring that back to the people who are working on developing like the Stellar core protocol, and also the API that we built on Stellar and the SDKs that work with Stellar. And so we like help inform like we help inform the developers so that they understand the audience that they're building for. So we're sort of like bring information from the ecosystem back to the SDF and to the developers who are working on the important code. And then finally, we also help do the other thing where when new developments come out, when there are new features, when there are new updates to software, we try to make sure that everyone in the ecosystem who's building on Stellar is aware of that stuff and adopts it and uses it and implements it. You know, it's actually like a really interesting problem with blockchain in general, right? It's decentralized. So if everyone needs to make an update to their software, right, there's a breaking change. You don't know who's building on your network inherently. Like you don't have a list of customers. You have to go out and find out who's building on it and understand what they've built, understand what they might need to adapt to any breaking changes, let them know what's coming. And so there's this big effort underway like right now because we're about to upgrade Stellar to the 13th version of the protocol, which has like some cool new features, where we have to basically get everyone in the ecosystem aware of the changes that are coming. And we have a month to do it. So that kind of thing, like ecosystem coordination, is also a big part of the job.
Got it. So I want to kind of pivot here just a little bit, like almost like everything that you said. And again, for the few thousand students that are listening to this conversation right now, I think it's a really, Justin's one of the best people you can listen to, and I'll explain why in a second. And I'm realizing today, like how many times I repeated the next line I'm going to say, but I'll repeat it again because I actually think it's a core part of this, where we're trying to really make sure industry understands what the students are thinking because we talk with them a lot. You know, I've been in blockchain for a while. Or I know a lot of people, and like maybe they were in ICOs or all this stuff, and there's like a little bit of pessimism, right? Like in some circles, but then I'll get on a call with 30, 40, like 19 to 23-year-old university, and there's no pessimism. They're like, I'm going to build an application and like, I'm going to build it on blockchain. Like they're not necessarily thinking about it. I think some way the people that are kind of entrenched in it a bit are. I think we do live in a little bit of a bubble. So for all the students listening right now or other developers, etc., like, and I've seen it firsthand for anyone listening, like I can attest to this. Like I know Stellar is governed by a foundation. I think they make their decisions pretty carefully. They're trying to be good stewards of their platform. They are trying to offer incentives, grants, like they said, initiatives, hackathons. So if I'm a student listening to this right now, Justin, what would be my next steps? Like, how do I get involved with Stellar? And I always laugh. Like I love being like the guy who like buys the most pizzas for like more universities anywhere else. Cause like sometimes just getting them a pizza, right, gets like 10 of them together on a campus and like gets them talking about blockchain. But like, what are some of the things that they should look for in Stellar, and if they can maybe get some cash or some, whatever you guys are offering?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think if you want to learn more about Stellar generally, you can literally just go to stellar.org. It's like a pretty well organized portal that will like lead you through the process of understanding Stellar, but will also lead you pretty quickly to the developer documentation, which I've already talked about, right? The developer documentation is really pretty good. You should be able to start looking at it and build. No other information required, right? So you can start building right now. In terms of what the kinds of incentives that you have to build, the biggest one, really good one that I want to talk about for like students and really for anyone is that we have something called the Stellar Community Fund, which is once a quarter. We have an open competition, so people can come in, submit a proposal or a plan that they have for building something on Stellar, and then the community votes on it, right? And the 8 winners end up splitting up a pot of 3 million lumens, which is actually, and there's no like strings attached to that, right? Like you get your prize, you keep developing. The SDF, no one takes ownership of your project. You can just win by convincing the Stellar community that your project is worthwhile. You can actually win pretty legitimate money. And so it's kind of like this ongoing hackathon that we have for projects built on Stellar, and it's really not huge. It's not a huge pool of people entering at the moment. You can enter into that and have a really good chance of splitting up that pool. And like I said, it's every quarter. So I would check out the Stellar Community Fund.
Got it. So obviously we're going through crazy times. If you lost your summer job and you can't go back to your university right now and you're sitting at home and you're interested in blockchain and writing code, like listen to what Justin's saying. Like go check out some of these resources, right? And I can tell you, I've seen it firsthand. Like they have a lot of different opportunities out there, right? So We'll put some of the links here in this video so you guys can check them out also. So let's pivot a little bit. I want to kind of zoom out. Obviously there's a myriad of products in blockchain, right? Like, from my perception, I've always kind of kept you guys, sometimes we judge this off of coin market cap. I don't necessarily do that. I kind of judge it off of effort and like execution. So in saying not just token price, but I've always kind of kept Stellar up at pretty much the top tier of like all blockchain companies. How would you define Stellar? How would you distill down for anyone listening, like what are, like really clearly, like what are the things that separate you guys? And like, if you go out, 5 years, like why is Stellar going to be there, and what will it have solved that competitors didn't?
Good question. I think Stellar is a blockchain that relies on like a consensus protocol that allows it to be very fast and very cheap, very efficient, energy efficient. And it also is like sort of set up in a way that allows anyone to issue an asset on Stellar. It has built-in order books so that you can trade any asset for any other asset. And it's set up so that it's easy to connect Stellar to existing banking rails, right? So what does that all mean? It means that it's a really good backend system that allows the world's currencies as they exist right now to sort of like be represented on one platform digitally, where they can be transferred, stored, and traded, all for super cheap and all for free. And because that backend is common, right? Like all of these people are issuing these assets or putting digital versions of local assets onto that network, it means that anyone can come build an app that has access to basically any market in the world, any currency in the world. So this like giant sort of interoperability piece, like where you as a developer can come in and access all of the other applications and all the currencies that exist on Stellar, and the fact that it's super tuned to make it easy to build applications on top of, just makes it this like really great platform for building programs. So I think what will set Stellar apart is that we have this platform that is continuing to engage more and more projects that are building on it. So the ecosystem is really growing fast. The other thing that really sets it apart is that we don't own this network. It's, the Stellar Development Foundation is a nonprofit organization. We steward the network, but really the network is owned by everyone. It's open source, it's open participation. You don't need anyone's permission to use Stellar, right? So we believe that this is like, the internet of payments, right? And like the internet, no one should own it. So I think Stellar will succeed because it makes sense from an individual's perspective or from a business's perspective to use it because of the advantages that it gives you of interoperability and because of like the non-ownership, right? Like you're not buying into someone else's company. You're building your own company on top of an open platform.
Got it. So, to respect your time, I think we have another 5-6 minutes here. And by the way, it's been very nice to talk with you. And again, to anyone listening, a lot of the university students know me. I've seen Stellar for a while. Like, I will encourage you to actually reach out, participate, get your blockchain club involved, get your university involved. Obviously, we help as much as we can. Stellar is part of like the Education Alliance, right? So if you haven't really explored those options, if you're curious in blockchain, go down this path. But real quick, and kind of one last question I want to ask you, but to kind of hit on a few things you just said, one of the things that I've always heard about Stellar, or when I think of like not buzzwords, but like, I don't know, like crypto phrases. Like for me, I think I'm a little bit like you, where it's like, I'm fairly technical, but I also live in the other side of the world where I kind of try to bridge the gap for people to understand things. And I think sometimes terminology or effort gets lost in these conversations. And one thing we're trying to do through these talks is kind of demystify it for people. The word payment rails, right? And some people might have understood what you're saying. I know a little bit about it, but want to hear your perception. What is a payment rail, and how do you guys kind of view that for anybody watching? Like, how is that relevant to blockchain? Like, what is a payment rail, and like, how can my grandma understand it?
Right, sure. That's a really good question. And when I say payment rails, it's really shorthand. By payment rails, you can really just mean any place where payments move, right? It's sort of a general term, but specifically what I mean when I say it and how Stellar connects to payment rails is that current banking systems where most people hold their money, right, connect to each other through this fairly arcane system. But ultimately, the cash that people keep in their banks or the cash that they keep in their wallets, their local currency, they need to be able to transact locally to buy the stuff that they need to deal with people on a normal basis in their local national currency. So Stellar connects to the payment rails means basically that you can set up Stellar so that you can build an on and off ramp from banks or from a cash endpoint, like a kiosk or whatever. Like you can take in cash and easily convert it to a digital token on Stellar. So traditional payment rails would be like banks or cash endpoints. Stellar is a universal ledger that can connect pretty much to any of those. I mean, what's interesting is that in the same way, Stellar can connect to other blockchain networks. Like, so you can issue a Bitcoin token on Stellar that you can easily redeem for Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network. And in that case, the Bitcoin network would be the payment rail that you're connecting to Stellar.
All right. So quick question on that. Like, obviously, I think you probably understand like the potential of Stellar. You see a lot of ideas, right? It seems like you're kind of in the middle of a lot of conversations. If you were to pick like any idea you had in your head, you're like, man, this would be the best blockchain use case. And like, if you were a kid today, like who like could have a hackathon with all his friends, like what would you tell them to build? Or like, what would inspire you?
Oh man, that is so tough. That is a high bar for ask. The thing that would inspire me as a kid, I mean,
like just first thing that comes to mind, like the application you haven't seen that, like if you were a kid with like a few engineering people in your program that you're like, all right guys, let's buy a case of beer this weekend and like bust out this code and like we could build a proof of concept. Like, what's the proof of concept you think would be the most fun?
Right. I think it'd be cool, really cool, because like I said, Stellar can connect arbitrarily to like any system of value. Like, so it would be really awesome. There are all these games in the world, right? And so many of the games have like in-commerce, some sort of in-game commerce, right? You can collect tokens, you can collect badges, you can collect money, you know, whatever it is. It would be really awesome to build basically a marketplace on Stellar where you could create stellarized versions of all in-game assets and trade them. So like you could be playing your game that you want to accrue all the assets for, and you're done playing, you know, the game that you played like last year, but you still have all this, you still have a character or whatever that has all this value. You can go swap the value there for the value on the other game, right? By bringing it on Stellar, getting a stellarized version of the asset and withdrawing it to your game of choice. So like a universal exchange for like in-game assets would be super cool, especially because it could also connect to like real world currency. So you could also sell in-game assets for like dollars.
Got it. All right. So for everybody watching, I appreciate you guys listening to this interview. I told you you're going to enjoy it. You know, again, we're doing this for 72 hours. We're having a wide range of interviews, right? From the conceptual to the regulation to platforms and benefits, adoption. You know, Justin is a handful of people that we're talking to that really have unique perspective into the tools and the resources people need to kind of make this dream a reality, right? And there's a few parties there. So on one side, we need the engineers of tomorrow and today to kind of adopt blockchain and really do a good job on execution. So, you know, what he's doing and the team at Stellar, they're focusing on building resources for you guys to, you know, again, like he mentioned, have good documentation. This is important to developers, right? Like if you have a choice between one platform that'll take you 3 months to ramp up or one that takes you a weekend to ramp up, you're naturally probably going to use the one that takes you a weekend to ramp up. They're offering you guys incentives, right? So they have grant programs, hackathons, other initiatives that you know offer you incentives, a kind of a platform to showcase your great ideas, right? And then on the flip side, it's not all about developers, right? So we have to educate another half of this community to really, you know, understand, you know, what are the options out there? How should you think about it? And you know, whether you're an enterprise company, which I know I've interviewed 10 of the top ones here, just for this conference. Even if you're thinking about which platform you should choose, right? Whether it's Stellar or another one, this is how you should kind of be influencing your decisions, right? Like, does this platform offer me resources to make my experience as painless as possible? So one last question for you, Justin, and we'll roll out. But, again, for any of the students listening right now, and if you could go, like, what advice do you have for them, or general people, like any last words?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a student out there, you just got to like step back and use your brain and reason through stuff, figure it out on your own. The cool thing about blockchain and where it is right now is that it's fair game, right? Like you don't need anyone's permission to get involved. So just like follow your curiosity, teach yourself, figure it out, and build something cool.
You heard it here first. Listen to Justin. Justin's job is to help you. Apparently there's even some opportunities to benefit from it a little bit. So for everybody listening, again, appreciate your time. We have obviously other interviews coming up, and we're going to continue this going for 72 hours straight. I'm super lucky to have conversations like this, and definitely really enjoyed this one. But Justin, it was very nice to meet you, and we appreciate you making time for this.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was a real pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you here shortly for the next interview.
Stay tuned to learn more about the state of blockchain education at major universities all around the world. Reimagine 2020.